And it is my pleasure, as you know, we have lost a member of our group, Mal Netches, but we have people who have stepped up to be part of the committee, our planning committee, which schedules all the events you all listen to. And June Blanc, who's on the screen right now, is now the head of our planning committee. And I really want to welcome and thank her for all the work she's done already just to get up to speed. And we have another member, Naomi Marrow, who is also a new member, and she's been another active member of the group, and I want to thank them. And so right now I would like to introduce June. Thank you, June, and welcome.
Thank you, Joan. So it is my pleasure indeed and honor to be part of this very active and, excellent group. I've been, I guess, a listener for a number of years. I've always held this in such high esteem. So it is really an honor to be now part of this group. So this is our second session of the spring semester. And we're just very excited to be bringing this to you again. As Joan had mentioned, we are a small but very active group now. Naomi is the newest member, having joined, I think, about a week after I did. And then, of course, Don Shields, Tyler Beebe, and Peter Russell, who have been really holding this group together for so long. And as I've gotten to know them, I now know a great deal about the amount of work and effort and commitment of this group. And I just can't say enough about how wonderful it is to be bringing these really timely topics that frequently we read in the news, but we don't know the background, or we suspect that maybe we're getting not the full story. So our ability as an organization to really seek out very credible, qualified speakers and bring them to our series is really remarkable. And I just want to say that we will continue to work very hard and continue the path that has been set by Mal and by our previous members to continue this quality of program and bring you the very best speakers that we can to give us a fuller story of what's happening in foreign affairs. This is a very unsettling time. So there's many issues that we are trying to cover. We appreciate your also suggestions to us of topics that you would like to hear. So, at this point, please do give us your ideas, and we will try to address them as well as any particular speakers that you may have an interest in. And we will also try and address those. Today's topic is one that somehow is always in our news. We would probably like to take a break from hearing about what's happening in Iran every once in a while, but there always seems to be things that are bubbling up in terms of Iran. It's an interesting time right now. And I won't go into too much further because you're going to hear both from Peter Russell, who is going to be our host, and introduced our guest speaker, Barbara Slavin. So rather than my sort of tease you, they will go into much greater depth of the issues that are going to be confronting us in the world relative to what's going on in Iran and how they see the world. So our general format, as those of you who sort of know the program, is that we will have a speaker speak for 30 to 40 minutes, and then there is a Q&A. We also invite you to participate in the Q&A. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A. Please ask your questions. I will be monitoring those. And then we also will, as a committee, also be asking questions of our speaker as well. So without sort of further ado, let me turn this over to Peter. And Barbara, again, thank you for joining us. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say. So thank you. Peter.
Good morning, all, and thank you, June. Thank you, Joan. Let me start by saying, while we know our group's concern is foreign policy in general, there's no doubt that the main focus is on American foreign policy. And there's no foreign policy challenge for the US that has been more vexing and intractable than the challenge posed by Iran since the 1979 revolution. Articulated by Iran's Islamic Republic leadership then and now, is not only anti-monarchical, but dramatically anti-US in regional and international affairs. As an adventurous international journalist and then convener of substantive dialogue on the future of Iran at the Atlantic Council, and now at the Stimson Center, Barbara Slavin has been in the thick of the debates in Washington about how to confront Iran, curb its interventions in support of terrorists in other countries such as Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, gain release of political hostages such as Mr. Nemazi, push back against domestic repression in Iran, corral its missile and nuclear capabilities, or even to reach its people in leadership through trust-building steps such as citizen exchanges. My wife Lynn and I spent 2 eye-opening years in small-town Iran in the mid-1960s as Peace Corps volunteer teachers, and then 4 more years from 1975 through 79, when I had the pleasure of opening the Tehran office for a New York bank and then winding it up in the wake of the revolution. It will be no surprise that I, for one, look for institutions and thought leaders like Barbara in the Stimson Center, who not only drive research and analysis on knotty diplomatic and security issues like Iran, but are dedicated to identifying solutions and real engagement, in this case, in the spirit of the center's statesman namesake, Henry L. Stimson. It is so timely for us that Barbara has just taken on responsibility this month to lead the Stimson Center's new Middle East Voices program. You can find her lead-off article, A Common Sense Policy on Iran, on the center's website. Barbara Slavin, dear guest, thank you so much for joining the Foreign Policy Group at Chappqua Library this morning. We look forward to your remarks.
Wow, thank you so much. What a generous introduction. And I think you, Peter Russell, should be writing a book and speaking, given your extensive experience in Iran before the revolution. I unfortunately never got to go to Iran before the revolution. I thought about it and wrote about it from a distance. I was a very young writer, editor for the New York Times Week in Review section. And those of you who remember the old Week in Review may remember the column called The World in the Sunday Week in Review. And for 6 years, I was one half of The World. I had a colleague on this column, but for some reason, all of the Middle East summaries of the news fell to me. So I started writing about the Iranian Revolution in 1978, and then later on, of course, the hostage crisis that followed of 1979 to 1981. And that was my introduction to things happening with Iran. I would ask those who are not speaking to mute themselves. Good Zoom etiquette. Anyway, I have a history of following Iran from afar that goes back to before the revolution in Iran, but my actual on-the-ground experience comes from 9 trips to the country from 1996 through 2013, which was my last trip there. And I feel very fortunate because this is a country that has been distorted in many ways. For sure, the government of Iran, the Nizam, the system, as they call it, has acted in ways that certainly are opposed to American interests, the interests of many American friends and allies. But there is also the story of the Iranian people, which doesn't get told as often. And I think that to this day, miraculously, there is still a fairly strong pro-American sentiment among Iranians, having to do with the fact that there is a large Iranian diaspora, much of which lives in the United States, and having to do with Iranians' aspirations for a better life, for more dignity, more freedom, a better economy. And of course, we've seen all of these aspirations bubble up in the last 5-6 months, since the death in police custody of a young woman called Mahsa Amini, who was, I think, picked up probably because the so-called morality police in the country had a quota of women that they had to arrest for not wearing sufficiently Islamic clothing. Her headscarf was too loose. Some say she might have been picked up because she was of Kurdish extraction, and they heard her accent and decided to make a scapegoat out of her. And I would recommend to all of you who are interested in the topic of Iran's ethnic minorities, a piece that we just put up on the Stimson Center website today about how ethnic minorities in Iran are treated. Iran has a Persian majority, but it has many ethnic minority groups. And it was, of course, a great empire. Large chunks of that empire were taken by Russia in a couple of centuries ago. But there are still what one would call the remnants of an empire in today's Iran. So as Peter said, there are many aspects that we can talk about, and I really do look forward to your questions. My focus has been largely on US-Iran relations over the years. And I think that we have to acknowledge when we talk about many policies that Iran has espoused over the years, that there are also things that the United States have done that in hindsight appear to have been quite mistaken. Those with a very long memory will go back to 1953 when the Eisenhower administration, the CIA, pushed for the overthrow of a popular Iranian prime minister who had had the temerity to nationalize the British oil company of the time. And the US was very worried that this prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, had pro-Soviet tendencies. And Eisenhower was also very, very sympathetic with British complaints about losing their oil company. And so the US helped overthrow Prime Minister Mossadegh and put the king, the Shah of Iran, back on the throne back in 1953. You fast forward, of course, to the 1970s and the revolution. The Shah of Iran, while he was very pro-Western in his policies, was also extremely repressive. And he threw tens of, well, certainly hundreds, and if not thousands of people in prison for their political views during the 1960s and the 1970s. And he was very, very hard, particularly on religious fundamentalists. And there was a gathering of opinion against the Shah that was supported by religious fundamentalists, but also by leftists and others, and a real popular revolution that featured the defections of members of the military. At one point, 1,000 members of the Shah's army were defecting to the opposition every day. There were massive demonstrations, thousands of people in the streets all over the country. There were strikes by the merchants in the bazaar, by the oil workers that shut down the Iranian economy. And in February of 1979, 44 years ago, the Shah, who unbeknownst to many was suffering from cancer, left Iran, and a man named Ayatollah Khomeini, who you may remember with piercing eyes and a black turban, returned to lead the successful revolution in Iran. The United States really didn't know what to do with Ayatollah Khomeini and did not make any real attempts to reach out to him until, frankly, it was too late. I don't know if it would have been possible to influence Khomeini. He was strongly anti-American for a number of reasons, and many of the people around him were anti-American, but not all. Unfortunately, some 9 months after the revolution, there was a takeover of the American embassy by a bunch of students, and Ayatollah Khomeini blessed that takeover. And this was, of course, the hostage crisis, which is the original sin in US-Iran relations from the US side, in the same way that the overthrow of Prime Minister Mossadegh is the original sin from the Iranian side. And I've been thinking about the hostage crisis a lot. As you know, Jimmy Carter was our president then, and he has just gone into hospice care. The crisis lasted for 444 days, and it destroyed Jimmy Carter's chances of being elected to a second term, among many things. And it set a very unfortunate tone between the US and Iran that has proven extremely difficult to overcome. I wrote a book about a decade ago called Bitter Friends, Bosom Enemies. And in that book, I do talk about some of the opportunities for a better relationship between the US and Iran. And there have been some. So in fairness, we do have to say that there were periods when Iran reached out to the United States. I always look back now to the efforts that were made by the Iranians after the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks, when Iran was actually on the same side as the United States in seeking the overthrow of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. Iran helped us both in military and intelligence terms in getting rid of the Taliban and in creating a new government for Afghanistan quite openly through consultations with American diplomats. But Iran's reward for this help was to be put on the so-called axis of evil by then President George W. Bush in his 2002 State of the Union address. And I still look back at that moment and think, what if the United States had not demonized Iran and had sought to really broaden and improve the relationship? Would it have been possible? The other thing I'm thinking about a lot is the invasion of Iraq. We're coming on the 20th anniversary of the Bush administration's decision to invade Iraq. And this was done with very little thought to what the ramifications would be, frankly, for the Middle East, and in particular for US relations with Iran. I've written a piece about this that will be appearing shortly about the hysteria and hubris that overwhelmed the United States after the September 11th attacks. Hysteria because for the first time, the United States had been directly attacked in a most horrific way. And the Bush administration was terrified that there would be more such attacks. But instead of focusing on al-Qaeda, it became really overwhelmed with hubris as well, and decided that the United States would declare war on what Bush called all terrorism of global reach, the global war on terror, the GWAT, as it was called in Washington, which meant not just going after al-Qaeda and the Taliban, which had harbored al-Qaeda, but going after Saddam Hussein's Iraq, going after Iran, which was a sponsor of terrorism, going after North Korea, going after any country that was seen as posing some sort of threat to the United States or to US interests. And I'm sorry, I'm a journalist and a think tanker. I'm not I've never worked for the US government, but it seems to me that it was the height of folly to go after all of America's enemies instead of focusing on the real threat to the United States at the time, which was al-Qaeda. But we went into Iraq, and this, of course, led to a reinvigoration of terrorists on the part of groups like Al-Qaeda. We got Al-Qaeda in Iraq, we got the Islamic State group, all of which flowed from the US invasion of Iraq and the toppling of Saddam Hussein. But we also got something which, again, should have been foreseen, and namely, we strengthened Iran by eliminating first the Taliban in Afghanistan and then Saddam Hussein in Iraq. The Bush administration got rid of Iran's two most serious rivals in the Middle East and opened the way for Iran to extend its influence into Iraq, and then through Iraq into Syria and into Lebanon, where Iran already had very, very strong ties, as well as in Syria. So some of you may remember a phrase, the Shia Crescent, referring to Shiite Muslim power in the Middle East. This was a phrase that was first coined by King Abdullah of Jordan. But it is the Bush administration that created the Shia Crescent, this power flowing from Iran through Iraq, through Syria, through Lebanon to the Mediterranean. It is really the height of irony that we got rid of Saddam Hussein, but who by that time was a somewhat diminished foe, having been defeated by the United States during the 1991 Gulf War, having his country under draconian economic sanctions for over a decade. We got rid of Saddam, and instead we empowered Iran. Now, Iran remains very influential in the region, and I think that we have to understand that this is certainly a danger, but at the same time, we have to also understand that the United States has shown that there is very little militarily that we can necessarily do about this. And I want to really concentrate on this a bit because there are voices, and you may be hearing them, that are advocating for US military intervention in Iran, as if Afghanistan and Iraq were not enough in terms of US military involvement in the Middle East. There are also, of course, many advocates for even more draconian economic sanctions in Iran. And Iran has been under sanctions now of one sort or another for a very long time. And we can talk about whether these have really worked or if they have indeed backfired. Of course, the other aspect of Iran is its nuclear program. And Iran has had a nuclear program of one sort or another since the 1950s, since the time of the Shah. The Eisenhower administration gave the Shah of Iran its first nuclear program, and I think it was under the Johnson administration that we gave Iran its first nuclear reactor. So the nuclear ambitions of Iran are nothing new, but they did advance slowly but surely over time. And starting in 2002, the United States and the international community became aware of the fact that Iran had advanced quite significantly in this program. Starting in 2003, first the Europeans, and then later joined by the United States, began a diplomatic process to try to restrain Iran's nuclear advances. And these negotiations, this process eventually led to an agreement in 2015, something called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. And this agreement went into full effect in 2016, and it was working rather well until in the fall of 2016, Donald Trump was elected president. And Trump had campaigned against the JCPOA. He called it the worst agreement ever negotiated. And his election put a chill on the deal, which was supposed to give Iran economic benefits in return for very strict monitoring of its program, a rollback of many of the advances that it had made, such that it would be really impossible for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon, at least until the year 2031. There were very strict limits on the amount of enriched uranium that Iran could possess and the level of enriched uranium that Iran could possess that were supposed to be in effect until 2031. Trump complained about the deal, he threatened the deal, and finally in May of 2018, he quit the deal unilaterally, even though Iran was still in full compliance. And this is the second really egregious mistake I think the US has made in terms of US-Iran relations. The first, as I mentioned, goes back to the 9/11 period and our failure to continue to try to improve relations with Iran after they helped us get rid of the Taliban in Afghanistan, instead to demonize them and sanction them and threaten them, frankly, with regime change going back to 2002, 2003. The second mistake was Trump's in leaving the Iran nuclear deal in 2018. Initially, the Iranians didn't do much about it. The sanctions slowly came back into effect under Trump, preventing Iran from freely selling oil and from using international banking channels, beginning to really throttle the Iranian economy. But after about a year, the Iranians did indeed begin to retaliate with strikes on shipping in the Persian Gulf, on a Saudi oil facility, with attacks on American soldiers still based in Iraq. And Iran's ability, of course, to attack Americans in Iraq has to do with the fact that Iran supported a number of militia groups in that country, starting really going back to the 1980s during a war between Iran and Iraq, when many Shia Iranians fled the country. Shia militants fled and they went to Iran, where they were trained by the Iranian military. When the US went back into Iraq invaded Iraq in 2003, these militants that had been trained in Iran came as well and began to establish a lot of influence and power in Iraq. And so every subsequent Iraqi government, the Iraqi military, it's riddled with individuals and organizations that have been supported and groomed by Iran. And so in 2019, Iran activated these groups and they began to attack Americans. And the situation really escalated. There was a period right before Christmas in 2019 when these militia groups actually surrounded the American embassy in Baghdad. And Trump, who's old enough to remember the original hostage crisis, became very alarmed. He started to fear that there would be a takeover of the American embassy in Baghdad, like there had been a takeover of the American embassy in Tehran. And he authorized the assassination of a man named Qasem Soleimani, who was Iran's most celebrated general, head of a force called the Quds Force, or the Jerusalem Force, which was like their elite special forces, CIA, the group that was responsible for Iranian covert and not so covert actions abroad, for connections with groups like the Shia militias in Iraq, like the Assad regime in Syria, like a group called Hezbollah in Lebanon, which Iran helped create back in the 1980s. Anyway, the US killed Qasem Soleimani and 10 other people with a drone strike in early 2020 after Soleimani had just arrived at Baghdad airport from Damascus. And it was quite a shock, needless to say. It led to an Iranian retaliation again against Americans. Fortunately, no Americans were killed, but a number of Americans, about 100, suffered concussions and other kinds of injuries from Iranian airstrikes on a base where, an Iraqi base where Americans were located. There was also a tragic aftermath a few days later in Iran. The Iranians accidentally shot down a Ukrainian airliner, which it mistook for an American retaliation for the Iranian retaliation. And nearly 200 people were killed on this plane. It did not lead to an all-out war between the US and Iran, but it was a moment of extreme tension and concern. And I think that it solidified the anti-American views of many in the Iranian establishment and certainly in the security establishment. So I want to get to your questions soon, and so let me rapidly sort of bring us to where we are today. Of course, Trump was not reelected. We got Joe Biden, and when Biden came in, he vowed to try to revive the Iran nuclear deal and to try to reverse the damage that had been done by Trump, certainly to de-escalate some of the tensions. And a process was begun in Vienna. Talks were begun to try to restore this nuclear agreement. The Iranians refused to talk directly to the United States because they said we were no longer a party to the agreement, having quit it unilaterally. And so a very awkward process of indirect negotiations began. The European Union, European countries, Germany, France, Great Britain, would talk to the Iranians on the behalf of the United States. The representative of the European Union would. The Russians and the Chinese would. They were part of the original group that negotiated this deal. And in fact, the Russians at the time were very helpful, as they had been in getting the original agreement. And I frankly think we would have gotten there if not for the Russian invasion of Ukraine a year ago, which, how should we say, distracted the Russians who were involved in these talks, certainly, and certainly distracted the world at large. And the focus on Iran was gone. Everything was focused now on Ukraine and the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And the talks continued. There was a draft agreement that was reached in March. There was another agreement that was actually reached in August of last year. And the US had signed off on it, the Europeans, the Russians, and the Chinese, but the Iranians got cold feet and they walked away. We can talk about why. One of the reasons was that Iran had a different administration, not a different regime. The regime is the same. It is led by a cleric, a supreme leader, the successor to Ayatollah Khomeini. But the president of Iran now is a man named Ibrahim Raisi, who is extremely hardline, comes from a faction in Iran that has never trusted the United States. And he surrounds himself with negotiators and diplomats who are also extremely hardline and distrustful of the United States. And they have sought to squeeze more concessions out of the United States to revive the nuclear deal, concessions that frankly go beyond the deal and that no US government would be in a position to make. For example, demanding that a future US administration not withdraw again from the agreement. Well, as we know in our system of electoral politics, nobody can guarantee that if a Republican president is elected in 2024, that president would not withdraw again from the agreement in 2025. The other thing that Iran has demanded is that its problems with the International Atomic Energy Agency, which monitors Iran's nuclear program, that its problems with this organization be resolved and its file closed, even though there are outstanding questions about some of Iran's past nuclear activities. And again, this is not something that the United States can do. So this agreement has been in limbo, on life support, a zombie, whatever metaphor you want, for the last few months. Meanwhile, we have seen the outbreak of protests in Iran over the death in police custody of this young woman in September. The Iranian system has brutally repressed these protests. Over 500 people have been killed. Thousands, tens of thousands arrested, many of them released on bail, but the repression has been very strong. There have been 2 people executed for their participation in these protests. There have been 70 members of the Iranian security forces who have died in clashes with protesters. So not all of the demonstrations have been peaceful. And while this has been going on, Iran has also been tightening a relationship with Russia, its historic rival for influence in that part of the world. And Iran has provided drones, which the Russians have used to destroy infrastructure in Ukraine. So Iran is now a triple pariah. It is being isolated and ostracized by many, particularly in the West, because of its nuclear program, which is advancing at a very rapid rate, again, unconstrained, because of its repression of domestic protests and because of its support for Russian aggression in Ukraine. I frankly have never seen Iran as isolated as it is now, not since the hostage crisis of 1979-81. And while the United States is not blameless in this situation, I mean, here we are 44 years after the revolution, and we still have no embassy in Iran. We have no normal diplomatic relationship with Iran. While we have certainly made mistakes along the way, I would have to say now that the onus is really on Iran for its actions, for its refusal to accept that its society has changed and is no longer willing to be bound by restrictions over how women can dress and behave in public, that its economy is in terrible condition, not just because of economic sanctions, which have been reimposed by the United States, but by corruption and mismanagement within the country and within the system, which is now, unfortunately, deeply entrenched, and by Iran's decision to support Russia in its invasion of a sovereign state, something that Iran, which we were talking about this just before this program began, the Russians occupied part of Iran during World War II. And at the end of World War II, the Russians refused to leave the Iranian part of the province of Azerbaijan. And it took a UN Security Council resolution, enormous diplomacy by the United States and other countries, and also very clever diplomacy by Iran, which promised the Russians an Iranian oil concession, which it never gave it, by the way, to get the Russians to leave Iran's sovereign territory. And now here we are all these years later, and Iran is supporting Russian aggression against Ukraine. So it is a situation which I think most Iranian people, both inside and outside the country, thoroughly deplore. But as usual, we have the question of how do we deal with it? Now, I wrote, as was mentioned in the gracious introduction by Peter, a long piece for the Stimson Center with some what I hope are very common sense suggestions about how we can try to help the Iranian people and deal with our problems with Iran without making the situation worse, and certainly not starting a third Middle East war in the last two decades. I encourage you to take a look at that, and hope it meets with your approval. But I think at this point I have now blathered for the requisite amount of time, so I'm going to pause here. As you can see, there are a number of threads that we can pull on in terms of talking about this very important country, which remains a thorn in our side all these years after the revolution. So I'm going to stop talking for 2 seconds and put it on you now to ask your questions.
Barbara, thank you so much for bringing all those threads of the tale together and reminding us of some real important turning points over the past 44 years. I'd like to start with a question and then turn it over to a couple of our other committee people, Tyler and Don and June, if she likes. But let me start by picking up on your point about the opposition and the way it has evolved in the last year or so. And we've seen protests, we've seen use of social media, but could you talk a little bit about how you see that coalescing? Is it really have some future? And what is the particular role of the diaspora, the many hundreds of thousands of Iranians outside the country, many of whom go back and forth?
Yeah. This is a very, very serious challenge to the Iranian government. And it reflects, years and years of pent-up frustration. I mean, it started with a protest against the enforced hijab, the veiling of women. But it represents so much more than that. And I think that first and foremost, we have to give the credit to the brave young women and girls of Iran. I mean, schoolgirls carrying on demonstrations, pulling off their headscarves and chanting "Death to the dictator." This is where the credit belongs. The many civil society advocates who have spent time in prison, some of them still in jail, many of them in a sort of revolving door relationship with Evin Prison in Tehran, who have fought for the rights of women for years and years, who have fought for basic democratic freedoms. Go back to the Green Movement of 2009, there was an election. The then president of Iran, a man named Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, was re-elected in an election that reeked of fraud. And from that sprang something called the Green Movement with, at one point, 1 million people coming out in Tehran to protest the fraudulent election and demand that their votes be counted and that the opposition candidate, a man named Mir Hussein Mousavi, should be declared the victor. Mir Hussein Mousavi has been under house arrest with his wife since 2011. He has put out statements, and others have put out statements within Iran calling for constitutional reform, calling for democratic reforms within Iran, for the freeing of political prisoners. This is where I get my sense of optimism and hope, because I believe that all the elements for a peaceful regime change exist within the country of Iran. They have gotten support, many of them, from the outside, and we have seen some very constructive work by the opposition outside. We have seen many groups come together in support of peaceful change within Iran, including the son of the late Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, who lives in a suburb of Washington called Potomac, Maryland. He has been appearing on a number of panels recently with others who advocate a change in Iran, and calling for unity within the diaspora. It's a very welcome call, because I have to say that initially there was only disunity, as shown by a very vicious fight that went on social media primarily, with one part of the Iranian diaspora attacking another part of the Iranian diaspora for not being sufficiently militant in support of regime change, with a lot of people voicing old grievances and grudges. And some of this was, I believe, orchestrated by the Iranian government, using bots and various other tools to try to turn the diaspora against itself, which was an easy thing to do, as I say, because there are leftists, there are rightists, there are monarchists. There are also people who support a group called the Mujahideen Hulk, the MEK. This is a cult that unfortunately has developed quite a following in the West, including among former US officials. It is lavishly supported by the Saudis and some in Israel. It has its own money, which it amassed back in the 1980s. It was a group that fell out with the revolutionaries in Iran after the revolution. It wanted to be in charge. And Ayatollah Khomeini, of course, did not like that. And it got involved in a series of bombings in Iran, killed a number of regime officials, was eventually forced out of the country, went into exile. And the leader of this group wound up in Iraq, where it worked with Saddam Hussein and supported the Iraqis in the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, a terrible war in which 1 million people, Iranians and Iraqis, were killed or injured. 250,000 Iranians died in this war. The MEK also killed Americans in the 1970s, assassinated 6 Americans. But it has tried to reinvent itself as a supporter of democracy in Iran, and is very involved again on social media and in getting the diaspora to go after itself. Anyway, this viciousness fortunately has died down, although it has caused a lot of damage. Many friends of mine who've been involved in this work have been threatened. Some have been physically threatened. And because of these kinds of attacks, there's a group called the National Iranian American Council, which is an excellent grassroots organization and has been falsely accused of being a lobby for the Iranian government, which is ridiculous. It simply does not believe that we should be invading Iran to overthrow its government. And it has supported diplomacy with Iran, including the Iran nuclear deal. But this group has suffered terrible attacks, and it's extremely unfortunate. And I myself was also a victim of some rather nasty attacks, I have to say, on Twitter. And fortunately, those seem to have subsided, but it has been a difficult period. So I think, my suggestion as a non-Iranian is that folks should focus on a basic unified platform of seeking peaceful change within the country and supporting those within the country who are working in that direction. And in fact, there's a manifesto that I saw recently from labor unions, women's rights advocates, ethnic minority advocates, LGBTQ advocates within Iran, all advocating for peaceful reform, an end to repression, freedom for political prisoners, an end to executions of political prisoners. I mean, the sorts of things that any rational human being ought to be able to get behind. And so this is my hope for the diaspora, that, you know, we've seen lots of demonstrations in capitals all over the world, you know, supporting this kind of change. I think that that's enormously positive. And the US government, of course, has also done its bit. Iran has been kicked off the UN Commission on the Rights of Women, and rightly so. Iran was disinvited from the Nobel Peace Prize awards and so on. It has been ostracized in a number of forums. I'm not always sure that you know, we don't want to isolate Iran so much that we lose the ability to confront its officials. And Iran was recently, it was disinvited from the Munich Security Conference, which I thought was a mistake, and from the Davos World Economic Forum, which I thought was a mistake. I think it's important to have Iranian officials in these places and confront them. Also, to have the ability to have back-channel conversations with Iranian officials. We still have business we have to do with Iran on the nuclear deal, and also on freeing American detainees. Iran is still taking hostages 44 years later, and there is a process in place to try to get freedom for some of these people. And the only way you can do that is if you meet. So there are contacts going on through Oman and Qatar, and I hope that at least there'll be some good news on that front as well. You know, in this piece that Peter mentioned, I referred to the Cold War strategies that we used with the old Soviet Union. I mean, Reagan called the Soviet Union the evil empire, but we negotiated arms control deals with them. We had people-to-people engagement. We used a variety of tools, including our US government media, you know, Voice of America and so on. Persian language, VOA can play a role, as it has with the old Soviet Union. Use all of the tools that we have to influence the decisions that the country makes. And we have a formidable toolbox if we use it properly. And if we, you know, seek a common denominator around a series of very sensible and common sense goals. And then hopefully we can actually help the people of Iran instead of making life even worse for them.
Yeah. Thank you, Barbara. I see Tyler and Donna come on the screen. Tyler, you have a question?
I do indeed, for Barbara. Yeah, my sense, Barbara, is that Ayatollah Khamenei has gone through somewhat of a notable change of his frame of mind, his view about America versus what it used to be. He's never liked us. We've always been on unfriendly terms, but at least you got the sense that he would be willing to entertain efforts on our part to communicate. In the recent months, I sense that he has kind of taken on the Chinese attitude, which is the US is in decline. We're politically unstable and unreliable. Our economy, although it's important, is not crucial to the rest of the world. And this reliance that I know Iran has had on our financial funds transfer system in the past as being fairly important is kind of diminishing, i.e. they feel they can get along without the support of American financial techniques. So I noticed a quote the other day in some publication where in his leaning toward the axis, perhaps Russia and China and so forth, he said, "We are in Asia now." I mean, he really seems to be viewing us as rather irrelevant, whereas before we were at least a relevant foe. So I just wonder what your thoughts are about that. And is he really convinced that going Asian, if you want to call it that, is the way to go?
That's a really interesting question. I think his anti-Americanism runs very, very deep. And this is Ayatollah Khamenei, and he was actually originally radicalized to some extent by the overthrow of Mossadegh in 1953. He was a young seminary student in Mashhad in eastern Iran, and he started participating in demonstrations after the overthrow of Mossadegh. He was also very influenced by Egyptian Sunni fundamentalists, and actually translated the writings of a man named Sayyid Qutb, who was a kind of precursor of Al-Qaeda, of the Islamic Jihad group that assassinated Anwar Sadat. So I would say that Khamenei has always been very anti-American, very pro-Palestinian. You know, he wears this keffiyeh around his neck in support of the Palestinian cause. But he's also been a pragmatist, and he supported the nuclear negotiations that, you know, were an effort to get sanctions lifted. I think that the U.S. withdrawal from the nuclear agreement solidified his anti-Americanism. He had always said, you really can't trust the Americans, and then he was sure of it. And this process of what the Iranians call the look to the East policy, it dates really back to the first bout of international sanctions against Iran back to 2010, 2011. When there were international sanctions placed on Iran to try to convince the then Ahmadinejad government to negotiate a deal curbing the nuclear program. Now, this, of course, coincides with China's rise as a major, major economic power. So the two were happening together. And then this look to the East policy begins. China was willing to continue to trade with Iran when a number of countries were not, and to circumvent sanctions that the US had placed on Iran's oil exports and on Iran's central bank. Iran returns to this with a vengeance in 2021 with the election of Ibrahim Raisi as president. And now Iran has essentially put all its eggs in the China-Russia basket. This is what they've done. This has been their decision. But the Iranian economy has not reacted well to this. And anybody who is following the value of the Iranian currency, the rial, it has been shocking. The currency has collapsed. The bottom has fallen out of it in just the last few weeks. Peter will remember when the revolution happened, I think the rial, there were 70 rial to the dollar.
Yep.
When I started going to Iran in 1996, there were 10,000 rial to the dollar. When the nuclear deal was negotiated, it was at about 200,000 rial to the dollar. Now it is 600,000 rial to the dollar. Iranians who do not have access to hard currency, who do not have gold or real estate or something that retains value, are being destroyed by this. The inflation that it causes, any good that has an imported component, the prices are going through the roof. People cannot buy meat. People cannot buy vegetables in some case. I mean, it is just awful. And the middle class has been decimated. More than a third of Iranians are now poor by the government's own standards, and it's probably more like half. And this is a country that has 90% literacy, oil, gas, enormous potential, and it is being frankly destroyed. So will this look to the East policy continue? I mean, I think I think it's a very bad bet. Will Iran be forced to come back into the nuclear agreement at some point just to save its economy and to save its currency? You know, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has actually once again shown the value of the US dollar, because it is where people flock in times of global uncertainty. So any tendency to, you know, I mean, yes, the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians may value their trade in each other's currencies, but it is not affecting the dominance of the dollar by and large. And that means that Iran is simply joining not just an axis of authoritarians, but an axis of the ostracized, at least when it comes to the economy. I don't think China can solve its problems. And remember that the Chinese and the Russians also cultivate very strong relations with Iran's regional rivals. I mean, China does much more business with Saudi Arabia by a factor of at least 10 times than it does with Iran.
Let me ask Don if he has a question, and then maybe June, you might have some questions from the people who are sending in Q&A responses. Don, what about you?
I have so many. It's wonderful. Can I compliment you first, Barbara, on your presentation? I think it has two aspects that have impressed me. And one, of course, is that you face us directly and you tell us as it is. And secondly, you're so darn knowledgeable in this area that it brings up so many questions that I would love to talk to you for an hour one day. But anyway, the one I have is, how much do the people inside Iran know? I mean, are they open to the internet and all of those things? Because there are two aspects to this question. One is, what do the people know, and how do they work on the persecutors, that is the people in the street that are shooting them and abusing them? Because if you look at the Arab Spring, for example, you see a number of different ways that regime change in that sense was made. So I guess my first question is, what do they know? What do they know?
Yeah, they know a lot. And again, I kind of go back to my trips to Iran. When I first went there in 1996, it was like dropping into a black hole because there was no cable TV, there was no CNN or anything like that. I used to have to go to the office of a wire service called Agence France Presse once a day to literally read the news. I would send my copy to my newspaper, USA Today, and I would read the news and find out what the hell happened in the world that day. By my next visit in 1998, I was able to go to a friend's house. He had a satellite dish, and I could watch BBC and CNN and find out what was happening. The visit after that, I could watch CNN in my hotel room.
Wow.
And I could actually send my stories via the internet. There was a business center in the hotel. It was the old Sheraton Hotel, renamed the Homa. And I could send my stories and I could get messages back from my office. Subsequent visits, of course, I could use my laptop. I could send stories from my room and I could get emails and all the rest. Iranians are very internet connected when the internet is not being slowed or shut down. It's probably one of the most internet savvy countries in the world. There are more cell phones than there are Iranians. They use all the various apps. They use virtual private networks to get around government filtering of various websites. There are numerous people who use Instagram and have become wealthy as Instagram influencers, selling products on Instagram in the same way that people do all around the world. There are other channels, Telegram, WhatsApp, and so on. And of course, we mentioned the diaspora. There are, what, at least 6 million Iranians outside the country, many of whom have family inside the country and who are constantly in communication with them in one way or the other, telling them various things. And of course, the Iranians inside were sending out photographs, videos of the protests. It's harder for them to do that now, and there are fewer protests right now, but you still get occasional videos coming out of people confronting police, of women taking off their headscarves and burning them, of people chanting death to the dictator from their homes late at night. So, you know, they don't know everything, we don't know everything, but it is actually pretty astonishing how much information comes out. And let me also give credit to the Iranian media in Iran, as well as diaspora media. I mean, BBC Persian, which does a phenomenal job of reporting, I think is still the best outside the country, but also journalists within Iran. There are newspapers that are allied with the old reform movement in Iran, the Green Movement of 2009, and they write interesting articles which will give you a different sense of what people are thinking. They will print statements by former President Khatami, former President Rouhani, the presidential candidate Mousavi, bitterly criticizing the government for its repression, calling for change, for reform, for release of political prisoners. And this stuff is coming from within Iran, which is astonishing. So we have to remember that as repressive as the Islamic Republic of Iran is, it's more liberal in some ways than China, and certainly than Putin's Russia right now.
Absolutely.
You know, you can't suppress the people of Iran. When I first went there in '96, I mean, one of the mind-blowing things about it, I expected a society where everybody was draped in black and people would be terrified to talk to me. Instead, everybody wanted to talk to me and invite me into their homes and use their names. I mean, it was so different from what I expected. And some of you may have listened to the reports that NPR did recently. Iran allowed in Mary Louise Kelly, an NPR reporter and anchor, and she did a great job of getting on the street comments, you know, from Iranians saying how unhappy they were and how much they hated the government. You know, just extraordinary. So this is a country that will not stop fighting for its rights. It had a constitutional revolution in 1906. These people have been fighting for freedom and a better life for over a century, and nobody is going to stop them, no matter what.
So June, did you have any questions from the listeners?
I had a comment from Jay, who very much appreciated everything that Barbara's been talking about and a wonderful presentation.
Okay.
I guess the question I have is that I guess with a very strong military that is beholden to the government, I have difficulty understanding how this is peaceful, or how there can be a peaceful change without some sort of violence coming out of the government.
Well, there has been violence, as we've seen, over 500 people killed. There has been some violence from the protesters, over 70 members of the security forces killed. What we haven't seen so far are defections from within the security establishment, which we did see, of course, in 1978-79 in the revolution that overthrew the Shah of Iran. I think that the moment we have a real opportunity, unless something can happen before. But the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, is 84 years old. He is a cancer survivor. He had a very bad health crisis over the last summer. There were even reports that he had died and that the government was covering it up. I think that succession to Khamenei will open up some space, and that there are people within Iran, including within the government establishment, who understand that it is just not tenable to continue down this path. If for no other reason, the fact that the economy is in such terrible shape. Now, members of the regime who have access to hard currency are doing just fine. For them, it doesn't matter whether rial is 600,000 to the dollar or 1 million to the dollar or 1 billion to the dollar. But the vast majority of Iranians don't have access to hard currency. And at some point, it just will not be tenable if they cannot get a handle on the exchange rate and on inflation. So I think something will have to give. And we've already seen that in big cities like Tehran in particular, but really throughout the country, a lot of women are walking around without their headscarves. They just don't wear them anymore. Maybe they have it around their neck, so if they're challenged, they can put it on their hair. But a lot of women just have stopped wearing the damn thing. And the morality police that I mentioned, which had been reactivated by Ibrahim Raisi after he was elected, has nominally been disbanded. Now, they can still arrest people. They can insist that women wear headscarves when they go into a government office. They can take photographs and arrest someone later if they want. But for now, basically, women are defying the law, which says they have to wear the hijab. What other changes will come? There will be other changes. I mean, over the years that I've been going, when I started going there, it wasn't just that they didn't have cable television. They didn't have music. You could barely hear music anywhere. And if you did, it was a certain kind of instrumental music. They have rock bands. They have concerts. I mean, Iran has created its own form of Persian rap, which is everywhere. They have fashion designers who come up with really beautiful clothes. They have amazing abstract art and not so abstract art. Films. How many of the viewers have seen a Separation, which won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film? All the other films by a film director named Farhadi. So many others that have been done. How many have heard the song Baraya, which got a special Grammy, which is a song about the protests, sung by a young Iranian pop singer. It means because of, and it's a song about all the reasons why Iranians were in the streets and are in the streets, because of their inability to live a dignified life, to kiss someone on the street, to make a living, and so on and so forth. It's a wonderful, wonderful song. So the culture has changed. The regime has to adapt, and it will at some point. And we've seen times when the pendulum has swung all the way in one direction or the other. There was a reformist president named Hamid Hatami who had 2 terms, and under him, society liberalized to a great extent. And relations with the West, including the United States, improved. Then we had the axis of evil, we had the US invasion of Iraq, and we got Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. I don't know, again, if listeners remember this guy, he denied the Holocaust, he was extremely aggressive, he revamped the Iranian nuclear program, was very active in terms of supporting attacks in Iraq on Americans, on Sunni Muslims, very active in supporting the Assad regime in Syria during the Arab Spring protests. This guy had his 2 terms, including a second term, which he didn't deserve because of the fraudulent 2009 election. And the pendulum swings back. We got a man named Hassan Rouhani as the president, under whose tenure the nuclear deal was negotiated. And we saw a bit of a thaw again in terms of the personal space of Iranians and popular culture. So what will happen the next time there are elections? Will anybody vote? Will Raisi change? I don't know. I mean, I think anybody who tries to tell you they can predict Iranian politics is being really quite foolish, because we have seen over the years quite important changes even within the Islamic Republic. So there are people there thinking now, how do we regain some measure of popular legitimacy? Revolutions are rare, real revolutions are rare. And violent overthrows like what, like the Bolshevik Revolution, the French Revolution, the Iranian Revolution are extremely rare. I think we will see something different in Iran. There will be change. There may be violence that accompanies it, but there will also be a reactivated civil society that will come out in the streets and will advocate for a dignified existence that involves some greater freedom of choice and not a foreign policy that is totally oriented toward authoritarian states. The Iranian diaspora lives in the West. Iranians don't move to Russia and China. When they leave Iran, they come to the United States. They go to Silicon Valley and they form fantastic companies. They go to Canada, they go to Britain, they go to Australia, they go to France, they go to Germany, they go to Italy. So the orientation is toward the West, always has been. And I think, the cultural power of the West and our ability to amplify Iranian voices through social media and so on is really important, through political activities, through lobbying our politicians for sensible policies. These are all the sorts of things that can be done, and it will have an impact on Iran.
Well, Barbara, thank you. That is such an eloquent and hopeful way, I think, to kind of wind up our discussion this morning. I want to thank you for all of us. And I think it was good to wind up talking about the people of Iran and the cultural depth of the society and the connections. Thank you very much. Thank you all for participating.
Merci, madame.
Joan, do you have,
Thank
does
you
June have any
again.
final words for us?
Yes, I just
Yes.
want to thank, that was so clear. That was so well said, everything you said. And I thank you, and I think the community thanks you for this. And I want to thank again June and Naomi for joining the group, and Barbara, I'm sure you'll be invited back again as things progress in the world affairs. So thank you all. I'm going to end this meeting, and I will see the planning committee in about 5 minutes, okay?
Could I just say one comment before you sign us off? And Barbara, Ian, thank you. I think we all see Iran in a very different picture than as it has been presented in the press and other sources. And I think you have left us with hope that we will in fact see Iran come back as a responsible member of a powerful and responsible member of sort of our nations. I also want to remind you that March 13, we have another great speaker, Aaron Wolf. He is a professor of geology at the in Oregon State University. He's going to be talking about water. And I think with climate change and growing populations, this is really a very serious topic that we all are aware of. I think we may see a different picture of how Aaron sees the world. And so I invite all of you to please stay tuned and look forward to March 13 and joining us. So again, thank you. Until 2 weeks, we look forward to seeing you then. Bye.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Bye, Barbara.